welcome to today's Oxford Polar Forum seminar, which is part of the spring seminar series in which we discuss in this particular series we are discussing and learning about UK-Russia joint research experiences, and especially in the high latitudes of in the Arctic regions. So today we have two speakers, double session with one presentation that's going to be given by both. One speaker is Dr. Olga Tutubalina, and the other one is Dr. Gareth Rees. I will briefly introduce them. And then they can start their presentation, which is entitled "Methods to Research the Status and Change of Russia's Northern Forests Using Multiscale Remote Sensing." So Olga Tutubalina is a leading researcher at the Laboratory of Aerospace Methods at the Faculty of Geography of Lomonosov Moscow State University. She's a geographer engaged in the remote sensing of alpine, boreal, and high latitude environments. And her major research interests or deal with the spectral properties of Arctic plants, the impact of industrial pollution on high latitude vegetation, and the remote sensing of natural hazards in general. Gareth Rees is a university senior lecturer at the Scott Polar Research Institute. He's fellow of Christ College, the University of Cambridge. And he's a physicist by training, who basically has done all his career around Cambridge, from what I gathered from his webpage, and he has research interests in the development and application of spaceborne remote sensing techniques to monitoring the dynamics of Arctic glaciated and vegetated terrain. His major research interests deal with the dynamics of high latitude vegetation and the interaction of this vegetation with climate, with the remote sensing of the cryosphere, and also the remote sensing of high latitude fauna, which sounds quite unique. Actually, here in Oxford, we have, and there is somebody in the audience who's involved with that. We have the penguin group, which works quite a lot with remote sensing and penguin colonies down in the Antarctica. So that's quite a novel way of using remote sensing to monitor fauna. But yeah, since you didn't come here to listen to me, I will leave the ground to Gareth and Olga, who are going to, I think, have a joint presentation in which they're going to switch between one and the other. So I leave the ground to you, and thank you for accepting our invitation.
Thank you, Mark. I will start our joint presentation, and it's a real honor and pleasure to present to Oxford University Polar Forum. We will talk about our joint project, which involves a 5-institution Scott Polar Research Institute at the University of Cambridge, British Antarctic Survey, particularly climatologist Gareth Marshall, Institute of Space Research in Russia, IKI, Moscow State University Faculty of Geography, where I'm from, and the Institute of Geography of the Russian Academy of Sciences. So this project, it's now sort of in the finish line for the current grant. It's been 3.5 years, and we are trying to advance multiscale remote sensing to look at Russia's northern forests. Next slide, please, Gareth. So what we try to do is more methodological project. I'd say we developed a technology to assess dynamics of phytomass, leaf phytomass, and also the woodland phytomass of northern forests in Russia since 2000, because since then we have a good MODIS series of data due to climate change, to also to assess and validate the trends at key sites. And we are aiming to use multi-platform space and aerial imagery and ground surveys. So we're trying to focus on two main variables, leaf area index and growing stock volume for the whole of northern Russia, using multi-temporal MODIS image series compared with climate. And we are trying to upscale from point field measurements to multiscale imagery via drone imagery and also Sentinel-2 imagery. Next slide, please. So this is the overall research design. I don't think we followed everything on this on this picture so far, but basically we have forest which interacts with climate and climatogenic factors. So factors which influence forests but are generated by climate to some extent, such as forest fires, pests, and permafrost change. We look at remote sensing data. They are on the left here in orange. So we're looking mostly at seasonal dynamics with MODIS data and also at 10-20 years with our time series from the year 2000. And then a longer time series we can't really look at with the current data. We can only explore this at the boundaries such as northern tree line with replication of temporal dynamics with spatial dynamics. So things such as tree stand change, which happens over decades, and ecosystem change which happens over centuries. We can really speculate about them rather than use them, well, measure them. We are looking at temperature as a main climate variable. Precipitation is in our plans, but we haven't looked at it yet because it doesn't have such clear trends and we're still collating the data. We're also trying to look at snow. This is also work in progress. And winds, solar radiation are in the future plans. And we are not looking at strong anthropogenic influence at forest cuts, airborne pollution in this project. We have to separate or mask them because we are really trying to look at the climate-induced changes. Next slide, please. So the multi-scale concept means that we are trying to assess tree stand parameters in great detail on the ground, including leaf area index measurements with photography and septometers, ground stock volume measurements with measuring tree diameters and heights in model territories, which we had a couple so far in Russia, in the west and in the east. And then we also use UAV surveys from 50 and 100 meters, sometimes from 200 meters, to upscale from these point measurements and from field measurements and descriptions of sites, which are 20 to 20 or 50 to 50 meters big. And then we use drone data, UAV data, to scale up LAI and GSV data to Sentinel-2 imagery, and then eventually to MODIS imagery to validate MODIS LAI products and ground stock volume products, which we have as a time series since the year 2000, and compare with climate data. Next slide, please. And we have 3 field regions, one in Kola Peninsula and the second one in Sakha in the east of Siberia, were the areas of extensive field research in 2018 and 2019. The third one in center in Norilsk is so far explored with remote sensor data only, and we are not talking about this today, but we hope to visit this area in the future when the COVID restrictions are over. So I guess, Gareth, at this point, I hand over to you to talk about field research.
Yes, thank you, Olga. I will talk about field data for a little while. So as Olga said, we base, at the smallest scale, we base our research on a number of discrete sampling sites. And we make a fairly standardized set of measurements at each of these sites. Within a either 20 by 20 meter or 50 by 50 meter plot, we measure pretty much all the trees. We measure the heights and diameters, and then we make geobotanic descriptions of the forest canopy and of the field layer as well. As Olga said, we actually occupied sites on the Kola Peninsula in northwestern Russia. We did that mainly in 2018, where we established 28 of these discrete sampling plots. We revisited in 2019 and did six more plots. In 2019, the main field activity was in the Sakha Republic, roughly speaking, centered on the city of Yakutsk, and exploring some tens of kilometers in different directions from there. And we made 11 plots there. So this was the main kind of measurements. Here are some of our students, and indeed some of us, making some of these measurements on height, on dBH. We also, and this was our main way of capturing information on the GSV, the growing stock volume of the trees, but we also investigated the effectiveness of so-called plotless sampling or bitterly sampling, angle count sampling, as a way of obtaining accurate information on the basal area fraction. That's what Bronwyn is doing in the bottom left photograph here. And we came to the conclusion that this is actually pretty good as a quick method of assessing the base area fraction. We also took dendrochronological measurements to get a handle on the relationship between climate and tree growth. So here we are taking a piece out of a tree. As Olga said, we have two key variables that we're trying to essentially measure at field scale and then upscale to the MODIS satellite scale. One of those is growing stock volume, the other one is leaf area index. And we have two main methods for measuring, estimating the leaf area index in the field. They're both optical. One is using hemispherical photography. That's what the set of photographs at the bottom left here is illustrating, and then top left, this is setting up the camera to take this upward looking hemispherical fisheye photograph. You can do the right kind of computer processing to convert such photographs into an estimate of the leaf area index. The diagram in the middle here is showing how we spatially sampled each of the 50 by 50 meter plots to make these leaf area index measurements. So intensive sampling over the 20 by 20 meter area and rather more spaced out sampling over the full 50 by 50 meter plot. So photography is one method for measuring leaf area index. The other is to make essentially direct measurements of amount of light at different heights. So we have a septometer, and we also have what's essentially a homemade septometer, which uses a multiband radiometer. So that's the main essence of the measurements that we make within one of these 20 by 20 or 50 by 50 meter plots. Our principal means for upscaling to a scale of some hundreds of meters, I mean a spatial extent of some hundreds of meters beyond that, is to use drones, is to use UAVs. And this is the one that we use. It's a DJI Phantom 4 Pro. This, Olga mentioned that we have 5 collaborating institutions in this project. One of them is the Institute of Geography of the Russian Academy of Sciences, and this is their part of the project. So they are our drone experts. So we established the field plots, as I was just saying, and we fly, our colleagues in Institute of Geography fly the drone at different heights, 50 meters, 100 meters, sometimes also 200 meters. Obviously, we get greater accuracy with a lower flight, but we get more spatial coverage from the higher flight. So for the larger homogeneous areas, we fly at 100 meters. We always fly with a lot of overlap in photographs, at least 80%, ideally 90%. This is so that we can apply the structure from motion approach to reconstruct three-dimensional geometry from the drone measurements. That's the core of what we do with the drone measurements. As a comment, a major limitation for us is the number of batteries that we can take with us. And we had an unexpected diminution in the number of batteries we were able to take to our Sakha fieldwork. We had a little encounter with the authorities on our way into the field, which unexpectedly resulted in some of the batteries not going with us into the field. That might be all I want to say about that. As I said, the purpose of the data collection from the UAV is to construct the three-dimensional geometry. And this is a multi-step process. The first step is to construct a point cloud of the three-dimensional locations of things that scattered light into the drone images. This we do in Photoscan, Agisoft Photoscan software. And what we're looking at, the biggest image that you can see here, is a visualization of a dense point cloud. So it is, it's not an aerial photograph, it's a reconstruction, it's a visualization of a representation of three-dimensional terrain. And then from this, we produce a lot of other data products, which I think we get on the next slide. Yes, we do. Okay, so on the left, we're seeing more than one thing, actually. We're seeing the canopy height model. This is the difference, the algebraic difference between the digital terrain model, actually the digital surface model, we should say, shouldn't we? And the digital elevation model. So basically one thing that's responding to the highest thing present, and the other, which is the ground surface. And a certain amount of post-processing is necessary here to generate some canopy height model that has had as many artifacts as possible removed from it. So pits, gaps in the data are the main problem. So removing the pits, or as many pits as possible, from the canopy height model. So there's a lot of post-processing involved after we get the dense point cloud from the Photoscan software. And last tools is the which I think was actually originally designed for processing LiDAR data, but it works just as well for drone-derived structural from motion data. So once we've got the canopy height model, then we start to extract structural parameters for the forest. And the first step there is to identify peaks in the canopy, to associate those with individual trees. So when we've done that, we know where trees are located and we know how high they are. And at this point, we can start to estimate GSV from the trees. Now, we already have an estimate of GSV from the geometrical measurements that we made in the field within the plots. So we have two things we can tie together here. Okay. So to say something about how we find the UAV derived measurements and the field measurements relating to each other. Now this comparison is just based on our 11 plots in the Sakha Republic. I don't think we've extended this to a broader analysis yet. No, Olga's shaking her head too, she doesn't think so either. So how well does it work? We can look at four things. We can look at three geometrical things: the height, the standard density, and the GSV estimates. We find that UAV measurements compare well with the field measurements for top-level trees, but we find on average a 40% difference with ground measurements when we have multi-level stands. This is not an unexpected thing to discover, that when there are many different tree heights present, the tall ones are quite good at obscuring the shorter ones from an airborne observation. Now, there are some potentials for addressing this through fieldwork with basically with upward-looking measurement from the ground. But this is the typical range of uncertainty that we find. The stand density, by which we mean the base area fraction, the square meters of tree stem per hectare, we find an average error of around 40%, and the GSV estimates we find an average error of around 30%. Canopy cover itself, again, not unexpectedly, we find is the most accurately estimated thing, because the way the UAV measurements are configured, the canopy cover is the thing which is closest to actually assessing. So we only find about a 20% difference between what we can estimate from UAV and the visual estimates that we make in situ. Okay, so concluding from what we do with the UAV, well, we'll come back to the UAV at a later point in the talk, but at this stage, the comparison between the UAV derived data and the field data. As I said, and Olga said, we have these 20 by 20 and 50 by 50 meter plots for our field measurements. The UAV surveys cover these same 50 meter plots in great detail. And with our 100 meter altitude drone data, we can extend the area, so we can extrapolate. So we find this a good combination for subsequent upscaling of the GSV. So it works, we can do this. One of the things that we have experimented with, or our colleagues in Institute of Geography have experimented with, is multi-season UAV surveys, and indeed, as I was saying before, combining the UAV data with ground-based LiDAR and photogrammetry. And both of these are very powerful as ways of adding to what we can do with the UAV data. The multi-season results are particularly interesting. So leaf area index measurements of the tree layer, they need to be complemented by leaf area index measurements of the ground layer. We're talking about relatively sparse boreal forest here, so there's quite a lot of gaps in the canopy, so the ground layer is pretty important. So if we're trying to validate satellite-derived leaf area index measurements, this is certainly something we've identified that we need, leaf area index measurements of the ground layer. We also note that we need to account for diurnal variations of light levels when measuring leaf area index with optical measurements. We're not completely on top of this problem, I think, is what we would say about that. Okay. Moving on a little bit to talk about how we estimate the GSV at the plot by plot level. We've measured a lot of trees. In total in this project, we've measured the geometrical properties of more than 2,000 trees. So we know quite a lot about the tree geometry now. So from the field survey, we can obviously calculate the number density of trees by species. We also know DBH and height. And from these, we can estimate biomass variables. Principally, we're trying to get at the growing stock volume. One of the ways we've been thinking about this is the fact that if we have got primarily airborne and spaceborne measurements, we have better knowledge of height than we have of DBH. It's pretty hard to measure the DBH of a tree if all you've got is a measurement from above. The canopy tends to get in the way of knowing much about the stem. So one of the ways we've analysed the data that we've collected is to think about, how much do you know about a tree if all you can measure is its height? And that's what this graph here is illustrating. So here this is our data from Scots pine, Pinus sylvestris. We've got height plotted on a logarithmic scale here, and we've got the DBH plotted on the vertical scale here. So there's a pretty tight correlation. So if you know the height, then you know quite a lot about the DBH, and hence you know quite a lot about the GSV of that tree. Putting those sorts of thoughts together, we, as I said, as I like to keep saying, we measured 2,000 trees, more than 2,000 trees. Mainly they were pine, spruce, birch and larch, but there were some others. We calculate the GSV of any individual tree whose properties we measured using allometric relations. We didn't actually cut any trees down. So what we do with these measurements is we then estimate how accurately you could estimate the GSV of an individual tree with more limited information. So if you know the genus of the tree and its DBH and its height, we reckon you can estimate its GSV, if they're these kind of trees, to about 20%. If you know the genus and the height, but not the DBH, we think you can do it to about 50%. If the only thing you know about a tree is how high it is, how tall it is, then you can do it to maybe a factor of 2.5, something like that, which is still not useless, but it's not as good as knowing the genus and the DBH as well. This is probably not interesting enough to spend time talking about, much time, very briefly. It's a way of presenting the characteristics of the different measurement plots that we had. So we've got base area plotted along the bottom axis, we've got the number density plotted on the vertical axis, blue dots are for our sites on the Koda Peninsula, red dots are for our sites in the Sakha Republic. These diagonal lines, they're actually an estimate of the, if I could call it, the optical mean free path for a horizontally traveling ray of light at stem level. They're a measure of how difficult it is to operate in this kind of forest. If it's a small number, like 10 meters, it means you can't really see more than a few tens of meters away from you in this forest because it's so dense. If it's 300 meters, then you can see a long way away. So the top right-hand side of this diagram is really hard to work in. The bottom left part of the diagram is really easy to work in. And you can see how the plots were distributed. Okay, so moving on to talk about how we upscale, we use UAV to do the kind of intermediate level of upscaling, and then more upscaling we do with primary sentinel satellite imagery. Here is a sentinel image of the Hibini study site. The big circular thing in the middle of this image is the Hibini Mountains. It's a laccolith. It's a thing that pushed up from the crust a long time ago. So our study sites are dotted around the Hibini Mountains. The upscaling that we do from the field scale to the sentinel scale is using an empirical method that uses the MSI sentinel band data themselves and a land cover estimate, which we make quantitative as a potential explanatory variable, and we tune an algorithm to do this separately for the Hibini area and for the Sakha area. It works quite well. Here is an enlarged version of the kind of output that we get from this. This is the color scale is the GSV in cubic meters per hectare. The red is really low, and then the dark green is pretty dense. So this has been derived by applying our algorithm to the Sentinel-2, summer Sentinel-2 imagery. The little polygons are where we have some of our field plots, so we can cross-check against those. Here is this is the Sentinel-2 image, summer Sentinel-2 image showing the Sakha area with the river Lena running through the middle of it here. This is the city of Yakutsk here, and we worked around here and over here and over here. There are some pieces cut out of this image because of smoke and cloud. There were some forest fires going on, it's not unusual. So there were some smoky areas in this image and some cloudy areas. And here is a similar data product to the one I showed you before, upscaled GSV estimates using the same kind of algorithm, trained on field data using land cover classes and the MSI band values themselves. And here's a blow up from part of that image as well. Yes, okay. Just to say briefly, one of the things that's interesting us at the moment is the extent to which the upscaled measurements of GSV that we can do with this data compares with the kind of global products like glob biomass and some other ones here. And the answer is qualitatively quite well. Quantitatively, there are some calibration issues, but we actually kind of suspect that the calibration issues are there in glob biomass, at least as much as they're present in our data. We think probably more in glob biomass. Olga, I think I can pass back to you now, if that's okay. You're muted.
Yes, thank you. And well, this slide shows a different part of the project, which is to do with MODIS based modeling of GSV using winter reflectance imagery. So if you model trees, well, coniferous trees in this case, as trees and shadows and then snow cover, we can model the GSV from the amount of area that trees and their shadows take in the image on the background of snow. And these relationships could be species related. So our colleagues at the Space Research Institute developed these different relationships for pine forest, dark needle leaf forest, and broadleaf forest. And this had been used. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah, this has been used to look at the number of winter reflectance composites from the year 2000 and trace different trends of development. So if the forest cover is stable, then the red reflectance and infrared reflectance is quite stable. When we have forest regenerating, then the red reflectance goes down. For example, this could be regeneration after forest cuts. And then when we have disturbance, such as forest fires or other anthropogenic disturbance, we can have increase in red reflectance because the forest is replaced by something else. And our colleagues also compiled a general map of trends of growing stock volume over the year, from the year 2000 until now. But it shows a rather weak positive trend across northern forests. And at the southern boundary, you have a rather mixed picture of regeneration after forest cuttings and after forest fires and disturbances due to forest fires and forest cuttings. So I don't have this picture here, but now I'm going to talk about leaf area index upscaling. So if I can have next slide. Yes, so what we tried to do is to use UAV drone data to validate MODIS leaf area index products in a big area in Colton's, well, rather big area for drone survey. It's about 6 square kilometers, which covers an area of predominantly spruce forest with some birch and also area of predominantly birch forest on a very mild mountain slope. We took the UAV survey and then compared it with Sentinel and MODIS imagery of the same dates. So this is south slope of Hibini mountain mass. Can I have the next slide, please? So what we've done, we have estimated canopy closure from UAV data. This is the canopy closure map, which is compiled from a number of separate surveys. You can see the boundaries between surveys quite well, because at these boundaries, the density, the overlap of images is not so big as it's not optimal. So we do have some noise in this imagery, although we, of course, we see higher canopy closure in the birch forest and lower canopy closure in the spruce dominated forest. However, the image is too noisy to use it directly. So what we are doing is we are smoothing the closure image using EVI index, enhanced vegetation index, or more recently used NDVI, from Sentinel-2 image, and we correlate it with canopy closure, and the correlation is quite high, and we use it to smooth the image, and then use the smoothed out canopy closure, so expressed through the NDVI index, to estimate LAI using this relationship. The final result is a Sentinel scale leaf area index at 10-meter resolution, which is derived using this UAV data. And then we compare it with MODIS LAI data, and which shows general correspondence with higher LAI in the areas of birch forest, lower LAI in the areas of spruce forest, and positive relationship between the two. So this gives us some hope that we are actually using a relatively reliable LAI product from MODIS data. Next slide, please. And then we can go further and use LAI maps all over the northern Russia. This actually shows a trend of leaf area index since the year 2000 for early summer, for 17th of June. And when we compare it with cumulative temperatures, well, we calculate temperatures since 1st of March, which is still snow-covered time for all of this area, and only for the average day temperatures above 5 degrees Celsius, so the active growing temperatures. We can see that at this period in early summer, the spatial similarity is really striking. So we see areas of the increase of LAI trend, and in the same area we see the increase of the cumulative temperatures over the 20-year period, which gives us a ground to say that LAI growth that is happening in the spring, early summer periods in northern Russia is strongly controlled by positive cumulative temperatures of the season. Well, probably this is quite logical. It is quite logical. What we also see that the spring period has become earlier, and the autumn period in the northern Russia also is starting to be slightly earlier. So the onset of yellow leaves is happening slightly earlier, possibly because the autumn is also slightly drier. But the really strong trend is only observed in early summer. Okay, next slide. Our colleague, climatologist Gareth is also looking at climate data. First of all, he has assessed different climate data sets, and the best so far have been ERA interim and ERA 5. They show the best likeness of the ground climate stations, ground weather stations. So we use ERA interim and ERA 5. And then we also, he's also comparing the extreme events, snow depths and extreme events, and circulation data, circulation phenomena. Can I have the next slide? And he's also seeing that data show remarkable decadal variability in terms of snow depth rather than duration, and that extreme snowfall events are associated with low pressure centered south of Kola Peninsula, so moisture is coming from the east, and this work is also still in progress. So I don't think I will say anything more about this. Let's move on to the conclusions. So the overall conclusions from our talk. We found that our arrangement of field measurements of 20-50 meter plots plus UAV surveys from 50 and 100 meters give valuable data which are scalable upwards to sentinel scale data. We found that published allometric relationships give 20% uncertainty if we know tree genus, diameter and height, 50% uncertainty of genus and height unknown. We also found that the single season UAV servers are not sufficient because we encounter significant errors due to multi-layered nature of tree stands. If you can have multi-season service, looking at the trees in spring when the snow cover is starting to disappear, but we don't have any leaves. And if you can combine it with summer and autumn imagery, then you can have a more complete characterization of tree layers of vertical structure of the tree cover. Alternatively, we can use ground photogrammetry or LiDAR techniques to accurately measure growing stock volume. We can see that upscaling growing stock volume from ground measurements to Sentinel-2 MSI imagery gives promising results, but we need to continue validation. And we also have first success in validation scaling up for leaf area index from drone data to MODIS. And we need further sites to carry on with this work. And we also see that leaf area index growth trends over Russian forests are clearly linked to growth of seasonal cumulative temperatures in early summer. By cumulative temperatures, we mean sums of daily average temperatures over 5 degrees Celsius. And I think this brings us to the end of this talk. And this shows the Hibina field station and part of our team that conducted field measurements in 2018. Thank you.
Thank you. I never find the applause here. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right. Well,
shall I stop sharing the screen, Mark?
Yes, so we can have a discussion, and perhaps if there is any figure that needs revisiting, we can share it again. But yeah, if whoever wants to put their cameras on, it always helps the discussion. But well, thank you, Olga and Gareth, for your talk. Definitely very much related with many of the things that some of us do here in Oxford and elsewhere. So it's time for questions. I have some questions, but if someone wants to start, fire up. Okay, I will start so far. You're using structure for motion to basically evaluate canopy height. And you seem quite satisfied with it, and you're getting the 3D structure of the forest out of it. I was thinking, in your experience, do we really need airborne lidars do they really make a difference, or do you think that that UAV structure from motion basically answers so many things compared to the cost of an airborne lidar, that an airborne lidar would not be a priority if you would, let's say, have a wish list?
I'll say something, and then I'm sure Olga will say something too. Airborne lidar is definitely on our wish list, and we did think about whether it would be possible to fly a little Velodyne LiDAR on the same UAV that was collecting the structure from motion data. The main thing that stopped us trying that experiment was actually basically an export control problem, because part of the equipment that we needed to do this is made in the UK, actually in Oxford.
In Oxford.
And it comes under the dual use legislation, so it can have military applications. So it's not impossible to do it, but there's an awful lot of paperwork, and we took a look at the paperwork and decided that we wouldn't go down that route just then. So we'd like to come back to it, but I think my response to the first part of your question, Mark, is and Olga might have a spin on this as well. Yes, we're pretty impressed with what you can do with structure from motion from a drone, but if the only thing that you have is a single season, say summer or winter, spring, data collection, we know it will have some failures. There are some things it cannot do, so it needs to be augmented with something else. Now, LiDAR could be one of the something else's. Ground-based measurements would be the best thing to do, but obviously that's not always the most practical idea. So I think if you're restricting yourself to the data sets that you can collect airborne, then probably what we think is that the best solution is to do this multi-season. So to go back to the same location and reacquire it at a different time of year. But Olga, have I said that the way you would say it?
Yeah, I think, well, I would also say that the Velodyne LiDAR has its own shortcomings with a very short range, what we've seen in the ground measurements. So it will not be an ideal solution. We need a full-grown LiDAR, and then we can have one survey, maybe in early summer or late summer. Otherwise, we need to come to the same area, for example, in spring, and then we can use the maybe the low density cloud data to look at the GSV, and then we can use summer data to look at the crown volume. But we need 2 or preferably 3 servers in the same site, which also adds to the field expense, of course, even if this is not the most remote area. So that we need at least 2 people to send. So after you have a certain number of sites, I think the economy of this says you should get LiDAR.
Mm-hmm.
And a pretty good one.
On a small airplane.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah, all right. Well, thank you. Link to what you were saying, you have had some Sam raised his hand here. I'll ask this question just because it links with what you said, and then Sam can get a go at it. You had some problems going to Sakha with batteries. Actually, the problems were not the batteries, but the control that happened somewhere along the way. You're mentioning that LiDAR might be a good idea, but it's not feasible in Russia. What could be the alternative to conduct these international projects with this sort of high-tech remote sensing equipment in Russia?
Well, I have an answer to this. I think we do have LiDARs in Russia. We do have companies who provide LiDAR service. So the solution, I think, is to hire a Russian, either have a Russian partner, a research partner who has this equipment, or if it's not available, then hire a commercial partner who has official permissions to do that. So we have to be sort of semi-separate in that case. So the Russian team does the survey, and then we have some sort of, we may have to have some sort of controls how the data are sent, transferred to the British team. But I think, well, what we have in practice in general, if it's just a forest site, and so of course we're not talking about sensitive military sites, but if you look at plain tundra or forest sites, we basically then process the data together. But it's a bit on the boundary of, so there are some, all the height information, because, you know, theoretically it can be used for rockets or whatever. You never know what is actually allowed and what's not. But the key is to have a Russian partner to do this sort of survey. And just to say that the battery incident we had, well, that was a purely criminal thing, which unfortunately happened with our student, and which was since resolved. But at the time, she was carrying half of the batteries in her backpack, and she had to stay behind. And we had to carry on just with 3 batteries.
So yeah, just to add 2 things to what you just said there, Olga. The point that you made about having a Russian partner and finding a Russian-based service provider who can give this kind of thing. This has actually been, as I reflect on it, because Olga and I have been collaborating for a long time, it's been a constant feature of the work that we've done together. In an earlier time, a thing that caused quite a lot of official anxiety in Russia was GPS. I think that's much less true now, especially since everyone's got it in their phone. But it was a serious worry, and you could get into quite a lot of trouble for having a GPS. So we can't do our work without GPS, of course. So the solution there was to be absolutely crystal clear that any GPS sets that we were using in the field belonged to our Russian partners. So the worst that was happening is they were sharing some data with us rather than us importing dodgy equipment into Russia. I mean, how that equipment actually arrived in Russia and who actually paid for it might be a separate issue, but that was certainly the official story. And the other example I can give there is we didn't do this with LiDAR together, but we did do something very similar to this with very multispectral, almost hyperspectral data collection. This was a 40-band multi-stroke hyperspectral imager that we flew, and there's no way that we would have got permission to bring the kit to do that into Russia from the UK, not without a lifetime's worth of paperwork to bring it in. So this is what we did. We hired in the services of a Russian-based company to do it. So we kept it kind of separate. That worked pretty well till they flew it into a mountainside.
It has been repaired.
It has been repaired. Good.
Thanks. Yeah, that's very practical knowledge, and I think it basically resonates with our experience too. Point number one: have a Russian partner, and point number two: if you don't, if that partner doesn't have it, hire a provider who's based in Russia for this sort of things. It definitely, it's a bit more convoluted than just flying there with your own equipment, but it doesn't mean that things are impossible. It's just this kind of practical knowledge that seems to be necessary in these situations. So, Sam, sorry,
you want to introduce, but just while I remember it, just picking up on another of the things Olga said. So the incident with the batteries, yes, the thing that sparked the incident with the batteries was indeed a random event, not directly connected with our project in any way. It was some weird thing that can happen anywhere, but probably more likely in Russia than in most places. But the thing that's probably common to most field work is the fact that we were using our own just ordinary hand baggage to move equipment into the field like you do. So the batteries were distributed around various members of the party's bags and cases and so on. And at the last minute, one of our party was detained by the police and prevented from travelling. So that meant that all the equipment that this person had in their baggage could go into the field with us. And I think that part of the experience could pretty much happen to any expedition. So thinking about trying to build some redundancy into that process and not giving one person all the batteries is a really good idea, which we hadn't done. So.
Yeah, further practical advice. Definitely distribute material and repeat.
Yeah.
Yeah. Good. All right. Well, thanks for the answers. Sam, if this was a real life room, your arm would be very tired because I just see that hand up there. But,
thankfully, we have these little yellow hands to do all the work for us. But yeah, thank you for really interesting talks. I've got a specific question about the structure from motion and the use of drones. I was quite impressed actually by the map that you showed of the 3D rendering of the point cloud, because I would have thought that a forest would be quite a hard thing to represent using structure from motion from drone imagery, because there are so many sort of complex pixels, you might say. I've done some structure from motion with cliff faces looking at geology, and I think that's an easier task, I would say, than trying to represent something so complex as a forest. But I'm curious about the lens that you used on the drone, and if you've thought about that as being a way that might enable you to slightly improve the accuracy on some of those metrics that you were discussing.
Well, I'm not sure. That was a standard, whatever what was the drone?
It was the DJI
Phantom
4 Pro.
Yeah, I think it was a standard camera that we had.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. So I think that particular drone, it was a standalone unit with the camera that it comes with. But I do take your point that there is almost certainly scope for optimizing the optical configuration of the observation. There's probably a cost issue involved in doing that. You probably would end up having to fly something heavier and more expensive, and that might actually cut into the. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a good idea. I think it probably is a really good idea, but it might impact quite badly on the practicality, because we might now be talking about a bigger thing that's harder to get into the field and actually fly around over an area of a few hectares.
I think the main limitation that we had was not from the quality of the lens, it was from the density of the forest. So when it was like in that 3D model or 2.5D model, it was maybe 40% canopy coverage, so it was quite easy to represent.
Yes.
But then when it gets higher, it's more difficult. And then we need to think about the amount of space, the resulting in the processing power we need to process the resulting data. So if you have bigger resolution, then you have much more power and disk storage required. And surprisingly, it also, well, different cameras can behave differently. Well, we just had a student defense yesterday, and they looked at gas hydrates in Lake Baikal. So we looked at frozen bubbles of gas hydrates in the ice of Lake Baikal with two different cameras, with 20 megapixels and 48 megapixels. And while the 20 megapixel camera was sensing, well, the surface of the ice is very, very straight. It doesn't have any artifacts, and it's quite transparent. So what the lower quality camera was seeing is the bottom boundary of the bubbles. So in the dense point cloud, they were appearing as depressions, while for the high quality camera, it was actually seeing the top part of the bubble, and it was seeing the bubbles as little hills on the surface. So it's always worth, I agree, it's always worth exploring the lenses that you can have, and not necessarily the most detailed lenses will be the best ones. It will depend on the canopy density.
Yeah, I was thinking along the lines of, if you have a very wide angle lens, for instance, you get a lot of distortion basically, and for a large part of the image, so a lot of that data is essentially useless. Whereas if you have a fairly long lens, which therefore doesn't have much perspective distortion, you actually don't need to increase the resolution. So your data is the same. I mean, I guess you might need to stitch more pictures together to make the SFM. But I think that you would get a less distorted, higher quality result probably. And it might be just the case that you can get your drone with either a sort of 35mm or 28, 24 like wide lens, or a sort of a 50 or higher like lens, and it might just be it might be worth trying. I don't know.
Yeah, fair point. Yeah.
Yeah, that is an interesting point, but of course will come with slower flights and more battery per per area in a way, which, you know,
overlap, so
if you get the batteries left in the airport, that might be definitely a killer for the project. But definitely it might be a point to think about the structure for motion in this aspect. There is a question from Jill Petruchowski. Happy to see you, Jill. If you want to ask it, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah. Hi, Mark. I really enjoyed that talk, and it was so super interesting to see the Bitterlich, the reloscope, I think it was, that you were using. Super interested in all that. That used to be a great interest of mine a long time ago. And it was just a really basic question to say these incredibly innovative ways that you're pushing to take these measurements and so on. Are you having any interaction with the new state forest inventory and the Russian Federation that's ongoing at the moment, which is, I know, received a bit of criticism for some of the methodology? Is there any potential for co-benefits there, or are you just staying completely away from those guys and that work?
Olga, do you know if Sergei has got a functioning link there?
Yes, I think it's linked with the center of Natalia Lukina that we attended the workshop recently. So it's indeed, well, the methods are improving. Well, I don't think we are an active link so far, but Sergei Bartolov in Institute of Space Research, certainly, they are trying to look at satellite-based methods, improving the growing stock volume estimates for Landsat Sentinel-2 level, and also improving the leaf area index measurements. But first of all, the growing stock volume, because what they're trying to do is to also, they are engaged in a big forest carbon project, and they're trying to improve estimates of the carbon budget for the Russian forest, which at the moment is, the difference in different figures is about 3 times. So this work is certainly ongoing, and we are sort of affiliated to that, but not directly involved.
Thanks. Linked to that, I had a question about carbon, because of course you keep on talking about volume, and it's great to have allometrics, but you didn't kill any tree in the process of this project, as you mentioned. So do you have any sort of robust estimate of density? Can you translate your measurements into above ground carbon? Because this probably would be of great interest to our system scientists in general.
Not yet. It is a goal, but all we can do is connect our field measurements to what is published. We don't have any measurements that we can combine with the geometrical measurements that we took and the extrapolations that we made. So that's all we can do. But we do hope to do it. Thanks.
I could ask other things, but is there anyone who wants to ask things? I see here people who have definitely been working on upscaling things from the ground to the spaceborne. So I don't know who was first, but Eleanor.
Hi, yes. Yeah, that was a really interesting presentation. Thank you. And like Sam, I was also quite impressed by your picture where you had all the dots for the tree crowns. But I was wondering if you could talk a bit more about how you upscaled from the drone imagery to Sentinel-2. And I may have got this wrong, but how you upscaled the structure from motion and how you applied your algorithms from the drone scale to the satellite scale.
Yes, maybe we can put that slide on.
Yes, I'm just going to find it. Just need to go, oops. That one.
Yes, so the key equation is here. The LAI estimate is canopy closure related in this exponential way to LAI, and I think it's taken from a Finnish publication. So we basically followed a published method of upscaling LAI, but the closure that we had initially from UAV survey was not perfect because we had all these boundaries between single surveys, all these 6 kilometers covered with a number of surveys. So what we did is we correlated it with EVI, or more recently NDVI, but it's not that important. So the NDVI produces correlation coefficient about 0.79, but for the EVI it's about 0.7. And then we used the EVI as a proxy to smooth the closure, and then we substitute it into this equation to actually get the LAI.
Okay, thank you. And for the biomass, how was that accomplished?
For the biomass, well, I guess this would be the slides before, Gareth, the growing stock volume. Yeah, this. So, well, the closest thing we have for wood biomass is growing stock volume, so it could be transferred and using tree density to wood biomass. I think what our colleagues at the Space Research Institute used was biomassar. They looked at red reflectance in MODIS and how it correlated with biomassar GSV. So they were trying to use biomassar GSV to calibrate the reflectance. So this, and they looked at different study areas in Russian forests with different dominating tree species, because they already have produced forest, well, vegetation map from the 250 meter MODIS imagery, and they update this map every year. So there is a whole collection of maps. So this gives them the ability to partition the forest into different types, and then they looked at biomassar values within a particular area.
Great, thanks.
Pleasure.
Thank you. There was a question by Marcus. I don't know if it was the same, but yeah, go ahead.
Sure, yeah, it follows along the same lines. First, it's nice to see that the MODIS products are well validated. It's nice to see that work. I wonder, do you have a sense of how well the MODIS LAI does at higher latitudes in treeless tundra? And also, if you have a sense where the MODIS LAI is more and less trustworthy, like where might the product be a bit more prone to errors?
Well, I should say that the LAI we were using was not the standard NASA MODIS LAI. It was adapted by the Institute of Space Research. So first of all, they removed the backup algorithm, which was in operation above, I think, 65 degrees. So they extended the stochastic model for reflectance to higher latitudes. They also had to remove some noise issues that were discovered in the data. So the author of all of these improvements is Nikolai Shabanov from the Russian Institute of Space Research. If you like, I can put you in touch, so maybe if you want to use the data. And so he has been using this product for the tundra areas as well as the forest. So he was looking at the whole of northern Russia, not just the forest areas, but we haven't validated it in tundra areas. So we think it's better than a NASA product, but it has not been validated yet. So if you have tundra areas that you're looking at, it may be a good point for collaboration to validate.
Great, yeah, that was very useful. Definitely, Marcus' interaction with NASA is rich in asking questions about MODIS in tundra regions of Russia. So, yeah. All right. Well, we are close to 15 past 5 in UK time, past 7 in Moscow. Is it? And yep. I don't know the time in New York now, Mike, but we will finish with the session today. I just wanted to noon. Oh, that's great! It's lunchtime. Good. Yeah. So I just wanted to thank again Olga and Gareth for joining us today in these times where, after over a year of Zoom meetings, people are slowly getting very, very tired of having yet another Zoom seminar or meeting. So thank you for your generosity today. And I see that Olga is sharing in the chat some contacts for
yes, Marcus, if you'd like to learn more about the MODIS LAI, you can contact Nikolai and then mention me that I gave you the contact. Yeah, hopefully that will.
Yeah, so
yeah.
Yeah, so thank you very much for inviting us, Mark. We're glad to have had the opportunity to meet you and to talk about what we've been doing.
All right.
Just wanted to mention just last point about the Institute of Space Research. They have a so-called Vega science system. So it's like their own Google Earth Engine system, and it's possible to join the Vega science, the science version of this as an institution, as an educational institution. So if you're interested to use their products, one way is the way University of Cambridge has done. They joined signed a little non-profit agreement, so it doesn't cost anything, but you need to learn a little bit to start to use it, but otherwise it has all the data that they produce, and they produce a lot of data on Russia, including vegetation maps, forest GSV maps, and forest fire maps on a yearly basis.
Yeah, so in fact the way we were able to use land cover classification as part of the way we upscale using census data uses the Vega system. So that's how we get our land cover classifications. Yeah. That's
great, very useful. All right. So, well, next week there is another talk, this time by Terry Callahan, who you might, most of you, be acquainted with, and he's gonna keep on talking about actually northern Russian forests, but also the Interact project and other issues. So stay tuned for that. And yeah, thank you for coming, and see you.
Thank you.
Bye bye.